welcome everyone, and I think we'll begin. There might be a couple of people drift in after we've started, but thank you very much, and I'd like to also extend thanks to the Australian Citizen Science Association for including this presentation in the program. I'm really grateful. So my name's Anna Christie and I'm a PhD candidate at Western Sydney Uni. I'd like to introduce my supervisor, Dr. Ian Wright, who's an associate professor at the School of Science at Western Sydney University. You'll see that there is a third chair there, and that chair was for Francis Retallack, who is one of the CADIA Community Sustainability Network, and that is the citizen science group that has basically prompted this whole series of investigations into rainwater. But you know, she is not here for actually a very good reason, and a reason that is testimony to the impact that this research is having, which is that today the New South Wales Environment Protection Authority is actually visiting CADIA and visiting her property, and to basically have some on-ground investigation of the matters that the research has highlighted. So we'll get going now with the presentation, and first of all we're going to have a little talk about the context. Today we call our presentation "We Are the Monitors Now," how rural communities are initiating pollution monitoring using citizen science. And this is an example of what is known nowadays in the literature as extreme citizen science. And this is a terminology that has been developed in Europe. Muki Hakley and other practitioners there refer to it. This is when the investigation is conceived and designed by the community, who then call on experts to support and advise. And that is exactly what happened in this case. The CADIA community, and I'm going to show you some photos shortly of the kind of visual images that prompted concerns. You know, we are marshalling data using the rainwater tanks as a kind of proxy for what could be in the atmosphere, taking into account, of course, the collection materials that are involved in between the atmosphere and the consumption of the water, which obviously have some role to play in the water constituents. The areas that we're looking at are in New South Wales, and this here is CADIA, there's Sydney, here is the town of Mendooran, and here is the town of Narrabri, where I'm from. And those towns were chosen with there was a reason for the choice of those testing locations. As I mentioned, the CADIA Community Sustainability Network originated this study, and then I came into it because I am a student of Ian's and I'm in a coal mining area. CADIA is a hard rock mining area where they are extracting large quantities of ore containing gold and copper. And my area in Narrabri is an intensive coal mining and also emerging coal seam gas area. And so we thought there was a really good comparison to make between these two different forms of extractive industries. And then we set about looking for a location that had no reportable mining extractive industries. In fact, there are some localities, some local government areas that have no reportable industry under the National Pollutant Inventory. So we went, okay, we are going to look for a town or a locality that has no reportable industries, which means that under the National Pollutant Inventory, they don't have the thresholds of reporting are not met for any of the 92 or so substances that have to be included in the inventory. Well, no, they were so Mendurin is below the threshold of reporting for any of those substances, and there's no industries that are yeah, so that's a control. So let's have a look now at some of the visual scenes of, because, you know, citizen science starts with observation, and it starts with just looking at what is going on around you and going, is that normal? Is that natural? What could that be doing to me? And these are pictures of the Cadia mine itself, which is, I believe, the largest underground mine in Australia. And yes, Ian.
We've got a fairly small audience here. Who is on tank water, as a matter of interest? Okay. Has anyone ever been on tank water? Yeah. So some currently. How's that? It's an enormous crowd here, so I want to make sure we reach. So those on tank water, has anyone had suspicions about the quality of your water? Okay, that's I've been on tank water for years and town water at the moment. I didn't want to study rainwater at all. I came to this area of obviously because I wanted to study the platypus. And I had heard about pollution from the mine, and the Belabula River that drains this area is one of the last western flowing habitats for the platypus. And I had my first meeting, and the way research goes, this is quite a dynamic process, isn't it? I went to the farmhouse, had an ale. They talked about the dust coming from the mine, and I was about 5 kilometres from these workings, and then I looked at the roof, I looked at them and said, do you drink the water from here? Yes, of course. There's our tank. I said, are you concerned about the metal fallout from this? And that's where it started. I'm now studying the Belabula River, but in the meantime, we have been looking at dust and drinking water and the effects on drinking water. And it is the largest gold and copper mine in Australia. It's giving a shake to Kalgoorlie, and there's more mines opening. They crush underground as well. They have something in the order of 5,000 hectares of tailing dams, which also lift dust. So that's where it started. And this is sort of the epicentre of the Cadia mine.
Thanks, Ian, for setting the scene. And, you know, these rural areas, many of us may drive through these rural areas. We see rolling hills, we see beautiful, bountiful, productive agricultural land, but often lying just behind that hill can be heavy industry, scenes like this. And here again, we're looking at the tailings dam. This was subject to a terrible spill, a collapse. It's actually multiple collapses. Yes. No, that's the Cadia Dam.
It's not copper. They actually have a sealant that they're putting on top of the tailings dam, which is coloured. Yes, it's a copper mine, but that's not. No.
Yeah.
So the two tailings dams, and on the right, that image. Thank God there were 2 dams, because the dam wall for the top one broke. And if it had been the bottom one, we would have had a massive incident that would have gone all the way down the Belabula into the Lachlan River and the Murray-Darling. Yeah, it's the scale is enormous.
So when I first went up to Cadia, the community showed me some of these pictures, and they showed me the pictures that if you look at these emissions, they could see this from their own farm, not for once, twice, but for years. They were watching this and making complaints to the EPA. And they had these well-thumbed images of photos many photos that they had taken. This was what they were living with. And these are the underground crusher fines. Now, what's significant about this is that these are fine particles. These are in the region of PM 2.5 or PM1, and these particles are growing in significance. They're under-regulated in New South Wales. There's definitely, the regulation of the fine particles is increasing in line with overseas trends, but we are really far from where we should be at. And one of the things we're looking at is the role that the fine particles are playing in the transportation of metal contamination.
I might add to that, if
Yes,
I may.
yes, Ian.
This is also an outcome of the citizen science research, believe it or not. Prior to the middle of 2023, those vents from that previous shot, they were unfiltered. The mine had been operating in the order of 30 years, and the EPA regulated the volume of dust, so the milligrams per square metre. They didn't regulate what was in the dust. So an outcome, actually, we had a meeting together with the head of the EPA, who was rather offended by a comment I'd made in the media. I gave the EPA 3.5 out of 10 for some of the work they did on the fish kills of Western New South Wales. And the CEO contacted me and said, would you like to come in for a meeting? So I thought this was going to be like a meeting with the headmaster. So I invited my lawyer, which is Anna, and in fact we brought the community along, and we started talking about the dust, the complaints. Long story, they've taken them to the Land and Environment Court. They've been charged with exceeding dust regulations, and then they got the great idea, why don't we filter this stuff out? And Anna's right, there's a lot of PM 2.5, but there's also a lot of PM1. PM1's the sort of stuff that when it's in the atmosphere, it goes around the planet.
And it also goes very deeply into the bronchioles and gets stuck there. And, you know, this is now really quite well documented, the role that the fine particles play in bronchial disease. And here we have this is a breakdown. This is actually quite an insight. You don't normally get this, but all of this turmoil around the dust has prompted the publication of some of the content of those dust emissions taken from several of the vents. And you can see there some of the substances of concern down here on the left-hand column, and the different vents that are producing that kind of waste.
Can I
yes?
talk to that?
Yeah,
That's just a table with a whole lot of numbers. That's very exciting for me, because that's the sort of nerd I am. Never before had the local community had a definition of what is in the dust. Believe it or not, they were actually told by the EPA is a fantastic organisation, but some of them said the plumes they were seeing was actually moisture. This was, again, thanks to the action of the community letting the EPA know about their concerns. EPA said to the miner, by the way, I want you to hire a consultant and study what's in the dust. They did it once, and this is the data. There were 12 kilograms per minute coming from the 4 exhaust vents. They crush underground, let alone what happens to the poor miners, some of who do have silicosis from that mine. But where does it go beyond the boundary? That, at the moment, no one is able to tell, because that is not being regulated at this point. And there's some nasty metals there. I will pick out lead. Lead is a huge concern, and we'll talk a bit more about that later. Lead is a cumulative neurotoxin. And so with the children in the area, if you get lead in you, it doesn't go, and it will reduce brain development.
And by the way, if people would like to revisit any of this or are interested in building on any of this information, just contact me through the app, message me, and I'd be absolutely delighted to help. Now we're going to look at the Narrabri pollution context, and that's my locality. Now, this is an area where the dust concerns have been long-standing, because daily, not only you have the 24-hour mining, which cloaks the valley with a heavy coating of visible dust, but we also have the problem of blasting. And I just want you to ponder this. I hope that the video will work. Blasting is the under-regulated activity that goes on in open-cut mining. Not only the particulate emissions, but also the different gases that come out of blasting are scarcely understood, and they are not regulated outside of the mine must act in a competent manner. But this is one instance that has actually spurred a number of prosecutions, but also a personal injury claim from another mine next door, 2.5 kilometres away. And I'll just play that if I can. I hope I can.
7, 6. Firing now.
That's the Laird State Forest, a critically endangered bushland in the Narrabri Shire. It's immediately adjacent to it, by the way. While you're watching this, it is shocking. There are people living only, I've got a friend living only 3 kilometres approximately from this site. Can you imagine having this kind of level of activity going on in your locality? And you have no control over it, and it's so now Whitehaven Coal was subsequently prosecuted, and unfortunately the end result has been a very, very paltry fine. But it's been a very, very long story. But look, this impact, we observed impacts of dust quite like many, many kilometres away from this source, but the EPA and the Department of Environment are insisting that it is it was a natural causes. So the thing is that I'll just move along. Oh, that doesn't look like mine at all. Oh, I don't know what that is. But anyway, hopefully someone from the technological branch will come and... Okay, no one's here. But anyway, let's move along, because... There we are. And now we'll just move ahead. Okay. Okay, so we've talked about this, the awakening of community concerns, the visible dust, and then what happened, they moved along and they started to have blood and hair testing, which revealed unexplained levels of a number of really concerning substances, even in children and in adults, some of whom were actually having some health problems as well.
I might just say, just for this, Anna's talking about the Cadia mine here. That video was actually from Narrabri. Yeah. But Cadia blasts as well. We just don't have images like that.
Yeah, underground mine. Yeah, and so I'm just showing you here the little logo of the Cadia Community Sustainability Network, and they really mobilised the community. They had multiple town hall style meetings, information events, which really engaged with the community, and they were able to really obtain a number of community participants who were happy to have their tanks tested over quite a large area of the Cadia and also Blaney and Orange Shires, which are just bordering on Cadia.
Socially about this, it's actually really awkward because the mine is also a massive employer in the area. not just the direct employees, of which there's more than 1,000, but also in terms of the contractors and the effect on real estate and businesses and so on. So that was actually a tense night. That was actually a fundraising night. It was a lot of fun, and one of the most fun things we did was actually a paper plane competition. That got a lot of attention. Also, throwing a gold coin at the Bundy bottle. I hadn't seen these things before. It was a cultural experience. But at the same time, raising awareness, raising funds, but also respecting that many people work for the mine. And the community are really open, that they're not, the Cadia Community Sustainability Network, they're not there to shut it down, but be open and honest about impacts and take every measure to reduce the impact on the neighbours and the environment.
That's very good.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then came the decision to sample at Mendooran, which I explained to you earlier. It's a sleepy little town, no industry, really mainly just light grazing activities there and surrounded by different forests. Setting the scene here, and Ian alluded to this at the beginning of our presentation, is the reliance on rainwater of many communities. And so this is, it does speak to the global sustainability goals, water security being one of them. And this is an issue for communities where, see, you have communities who are solely reliant on their tanks. Some have a choice between the tank and the town water. Others have a choice between a tank and a bore water. And we encountered different variations of those, you know, those households. Some of them would tell us that they had the tank water, but they would only drink their bore water. And others in town told us we're encouraged not to drink our tank water, which is a really hot topic at the moment in Narrabri, because two of Narrabri's town bores have been shut down due to PFAS. And people are going, well, you told us not to drink our tank water, but maybe the town water is worse. So this is a story in progress right now, and how the Narrabri community is dealing with it is ongoing.
And they can't all move to Mendooran.
No. So just to draw attention to, from a scholarly point of view, what are the gaps in rainwater tank analysis? There is a very small amount of research that is available to us in the subject at the moment, and we're hoping to contribute to that. Also, the methods of sampling don't really reflect what is at the bottom of the tank, and I'm going to get to that in a second. Disturbance of the sediment is known in the literature, but the thing is that the EPA, they prefer to focus the attention on the roofing and the collection materials and the tank material as the potential source of contaminants. And now I feel a bit mean to do this, but I'm going to show you a comparison of the method that was used in the apparatus that is used by the EPA and by the community. And this, see, the thing is that citizen scientists are often denigrated in that they can't, or derided, they can't, that they don't use the accepted methodologies of professional scientists.
Can I just talk about this slide?
Yeah, please.
So at this point, I might explain my relationship with the Cadia community. I didn't know them well. I wanted to study the Balabular River and platypus. I have a PhD student whose PhD's been examined at the moment who looks at platypus. She's actually found PFAS in a lot of dead platypus. It's horrific stuff, and it bioaccumulates at an incredible rate. So I raised concerns to the EPA about the dust and contamination concerns of the locals. I didn't know much about it, and the EPA put me on an expert panel as a volunteer with other academics and technical experts. And the community, I didn't know them. They were concerned about the dust falling on their roofs and going into their water tank. They generated some funny looking data. We told Department of Health about it in New South Wales. They did some testing. Everything's fine. How do you reckon they tested the tanks? Any ideas? How would Department of Health test a tank?
Well, can I step in here? Because I want to just mention the day that I went round and some of the farm workers were actually mocking the EPA. They were joking and saying to us, oh, you should have seen what they came. They came with a half cut off milk bottle connected to a stick, and they were mocking the EPA.
But can I just say at this point, the Department of Health was testing the tank by turning on the tap.
That's all you do.
Yeah, absolutely. But the contaminants in water tanks lie at the bottom. There's a layer of sediment at the bottom. And it's not just known in the literature that particularly when the levels, I'll keep it on the previous one, we'll go back to that in a sec, but when the level of the water tank drops and then you get rain, whatever's in the sediment stirs up. And I know this from personal knowledge because my mother lived north of this place for many years, and when the millennium drought was on, all the whites went brown because it got stirred up. So the citizen scientists found this sampling device they called a dipper, and they started getting strange results. So I don't believe anyone until I see the data. I went up and looked at what they did and said to the EPA, I think they're doing better sampling than you. Show the EPA now.
Yeah. So we're just looking here at the, and I feel a bit bad because it is mocking them a bit, but you've got on the left-hand side the EPA officer using this contraption that we'd been told about, which you can see it here. Right, now this has quite a wide surface area. When that enters the water, it immediately displaces the solids. Compared with this implement here, this is the biobaler, and this has been adapted. It's used to get samples of leachate at landfills. So this is able to penetrate the surface, it's able to reach a known depth, and it's able to sample faithfully the material that is at that depth, rather than the other clunky, completely inappropriate, we think, implement. And so that was that was actually the community that came up with that idea. Serendipitous, because someone in the community knew someone who knew how to do this and use this implement. And here's a little bit of a diagram showing you what Ian has just been referring to about the way that the solids accumulate at the bottom, and the way that the position of the tap can often bypass the actual solids. So why is that a problem? It's a problem because after a heavy rain, those bottom solids could be dispersed. And there's
I might talk through
yes,
this slide.
please do.
So when this was happening, the orange district around the Katie mine was getting lots and lots of rain. So the water tanks were nearly full. Therefore, sediment at bottom was stable. Now the outlet, and that one of the reasons I asked you about having a water tank, where is the outlet for the water tank? It's at the bottom, or close at the bottom. Several of them are actually right at the bottom. So the exposure pathway, when you've got the outlet at the bottom and you've got that layer of sediment, as long as your tank's full, as long as we don't have droughts, everything's fine. But that's why I did the model on the right. When the level drops and then you get a thunderstorm, or when the truck comes to deliver water, a lot of people buy water, that stirs it up. So Anna and I and a colleague, Amy, published this based on what the local community had developed. How do you do it? It's not straightforward. You need to unscrew the inlet. And if anyone has looked at a water tank, sometimes there's up to about 12 different screws or bolts. We could never get one back on properly because they're unique. And then you drop this Perspex tube. It's got a large marble in the bottom. It enables you to grab a sample. It will disturb a bit of that sediment. And the philosophy was that's pumpable water, and it recreates some disturbance, but it shows what can be mobilised. So that top, we're just holding it beside the water outlet. The community was frustrated. They couldn't get the Department of Health or EPA to realise this is an exposure pathway, and the metals and other contaminants in there are probably entering the house and therefore people.
So several sorties of testing were undertaken, doing field testing, as well as we sent samples off to our laboratory EnviroLab, NATA accredited lab in Sydney. And here come the results. And Ian, would you like to sort of outline some of the key points? Here, take the clicker and you can click through if you like to the different substances.
Lead, and water tanks. Lead is a huge worry across all areas we go to. But we did, is that the pointer just in the middle?
The second one, that point, this one, yeah. Oh, no, sorry. The pointer is the top one.
Okay.
Sorry.
You're right. So we took 3 samples. We took a sample at the kitchen tap, or whatever tap was driven from the odd. For the odd farm, it was actually like a shed, but it was generally the household tap. We also took a sample at the very top. So the property, the purification property, is that sedimentation, the sediment will drop to the bottom. But that sample we took at the bottom, on average, this is 50 tanks in the Cadia area. The lead guideline for health is 10 parts per billion, 10 micrograms per litre. We generally didn't get measurable levels of lead at the top of the tank or at the kitchen tap. But at the bottom, yes. Copper. It is a copper mine nearby. We don't know, and we can't substantiate that the copper is causing this. It's quite a complicated exercise. How do I get... No, I wanted the other...
Do you want to point? Yeah, pointing is the top.
Okay. Yeah, that's it. Beautiful. You'll notice the top of the tank and then the tap. The copper concentration is increased at the tap. Any ideas why?
The pipe, copper pipe.
Yes, it's leaching copper out of the pipe. This water is ionically very, very dilute, but it's mostly acidic, quite acidic as well. So there is a lot of leaching, and some of the lead probably also comes from the piping, because solder, the soldering that joins a lot of the pipes, used to have lead in it. Also flashing on the roof. So it is actually quite hard to work out. It's actually impossible to work out exactly, to isolate where this is coming from. So this is just the results from Cadia. So we then did a comparison of about 50 samples at Narrabri tanks, 50 roughly at Manduran and Cadia. And you don't want arsenic in your water. Arsenic's also a health-related thing. That's the median. This is the most skewed data I've ever dealt with. You have almost nothing or massive concentrations. It's basically made for non-parametric analysis. So very highly variable, and many tanks do have concentrations well above the guidelines. Anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, I'd only like to add a point about the point you were making about the collection materials contributing. And, you know, at some point we need to cut out the middleman, because these collection materials are being used by the authorities to obscure the potential sources of contamination. And we operate at the intersection of science and law. You know, we've been hearing quite a bit about the intersection of science and policy. We are in a different situation, because we actually work with communities who have real grievances against industries in the area who could actually be the cause of these problems. So I'd just like to add that and have that in mind. We know that the collection materials could be responsible, but we also trying to isolate links between these substances and those industries?
Yeah, absolutely. And when Anna said Francis can't be here because the EPA is visiting, it's the entire board of the EPA visiting. I've actually never heard of that before. Usually they stay close to the boardroom in Sydney, but they're all coming out. The EPA regard the Cadia mine, and it is also associated with pollution of the river and PFAS as well as dust. And we're using dust, and we're looking at tanks essentially as accumulators of dust. There are just as many concerns in the community about them breathing this as well. So at the moment, the EPA has successfully prosecuted the mine for exceeding what are quite frankly rather ambiguous and flimsy regulations.
Flimsy, that's the word that was in my mind.
But the mass of dust was regulated, not the metal content or even the silica content of the dust, which its crystalline silica is in high proportion in that.
Yeah, and as we know, we are very eagerly awaiting the results of a feasibility study that the Cadia operators have been forced to undertake, which is going to be quite interesting because they're supposed to now look at the feasibility of measuring the content of these contaminating metals in the atmosphere. That's due only in a few weeks' time, so it's going to be very revealing.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I come from the water industry and studying water pollution. It's relatively, in my experience, quite easy. You have, if you can imagine, a pipeline of effluent going in a river. You sample upstream, you sample downstream, you sample the effluent, put those three together. This dust and contaminants, much, much, much harder. Depends on wind direction. It also depends on actually monitoring it. That's only the one single study they've ever done monitoring the dust emissions from the exhaust vents. The dust emissions weren't tested for metals lifting off the tailings dam and the other. So huge room for improvement in regulation here.
Yes, and in my thesis postulates basically it's an ignorance arrangement. That these conditions are designed to suppress this information, which, for all we know, a lot of this information that we want, the mines actually have. You know, they have sensor technology. They are using technology way, way beyond what's available to the community. Hello. And so, yeah, anyway, watch this space. And we'll just move along now just to talk about some of these other substances because they raised additional questions in the town of Mendooran particularly about how some of these contaminants are so high in a town with no reporting industries. And we have some thoughts about it, and they relate to the physical location, the potential exposure to prevailing winds, and the transportation of the small particles. But this is just all us coming up with potential pathways.
I don't know if this is going to work, but I'm going to just project my voice. So this has come from we've just submitted a manuscript for peer review, and this has just come from those results. What we lacked before with our previous study of Cadia was we didn't have data from a non-mining area. My biggest surprise is actually Mendooran. We went there because there was no mining, and the results are way worse than I expected. Lead is everywhere. We can't statistically separate it, and there is, I didn't know this, but there's actually lead in zinc. A lot of the galvanised roofs, galvanised iron, when they mine the zinc, lead comes with it. Metals don't stick to just exclusively being by themselves. Also lead flashing, lead solder in the joints. This is at the bottom. These are the samples taken from the bottom of the tank. But nearly all tank studies done in Australia, most of them are actually done in urban environments, believe it or not. million Australians drink water out of tanks.
Yeah.
Do you know what legislation applies to them and the monitoring?
Zero.
Yes, nothing. And I know that from when we got Department of Health to check out the concentration of metals in the Cadia tanks, they took 25 samples out of the tap, everything was fine, there's no problem. Let's get away from here.
Yeah.
We have data that we think the mine emissions are contributing to that, but we've come across a really broad general issue. People are encouraged to clean their tanks out, but who does? And there are services for people, it's a bit like cleaning a pool, you know, vacuuming the bottom. People can do that, but manganese does have health consequences, and that's one of the ones where just the median concentration for the Cadia mine exceeded the health guidelines.
Do you have a question?
Yeah, I just want to ask a question. Was there any comparison between types of houses? I'm assuming that maybe it's older houses that have more lead.
We did at Narrabri collected a lot of metadata, but about everything from the tank materials, age of tank, whether it had been cleaned, distance from a road, distance from a mine, a whole range of them. But we didn't have like-for-like metadata for the other areas, so we can't really compare them.
Yeah, I do think it'd be worthwhile looking at age of home or age of...
Oh, absolutely. But what we were desperate for was getting 50 samples from each area. And also, so how we contacted the community, generally Facebook or word of mouth?
Yeah, we used a number of channels. Social media was one of them. Also, anyone who had previously taken part in any kind of environmental studies who you knew would be amenable to having their rainwater tank tested. So it was pretty... it was pretty random in that way, that we didn't just have a pool of people who already thought they had contaminated tanks. But, in Narrabri, people are concerned because they see the pollution. But look at the results. The results were that actually Narrabri's tanks, a smaller percentage exceeded the Australian drinking water guidelines by lesser percentages. And one reason could be that the dust from coal mines is more in the large particulate size, the PM10 size, than the hard rock mine, and that it's the smaller particles that go further. So that could be an explanation for that.
And here's a graphic that really bothers me. Mercury. Cadmium is almost the same. I don't know this yet. We're going back to Mendurin, but we suspect that there's leaching from solar cells, photovoltaic cells, because a lot of the roofs that are used to collect drinking water also hold up the photovoltaic cells. And I've searched in the literature for cadmium as well, but mercury is known. How did we know this? Because a lot of the solar cells are heading towards the end of their life. So there's been leaching tests done on what happens to them in landfill.
Hugh, do you want to just speak up so others can hear as well?
So, like a lot of people listening to this, I thought, oh, geez, yeah. We're all guinea pigs, right? And so the study is clearly demonstrating the fact that we're all guinea pigs. The take-home message I get from it is we do it to ourselves. Like, we make the modification to the environment. We are the biological indicator for the contamination of the environment. Why should we be so surprised that we show up in the health data epidemiologically as the bioindicators of the gross contamination of the land and the waters? If you ask the Indigenous people, you should be looking after the land and the waters, and the land and the waters will look after you. And we're finding out painfully just how badly we've been doing.
And we may not be very popular if it is shown that that somehow these energy systems are creating another new problem. Mm.
So we applied we're using the Australian drinking water guidelines here, but again, in terms of the policy, regulation and behaviour, if you're drinking rainwater tanks, it's totally up to you.
Yeah. You have freedom to poison yourself.
And we found a very, I wouldn't say completely disinterested. The relationship with the EPA has been good, but these mines also generate a lot of government revenue, a lot of employment. I'm really happy that the EPA has tightened regulations on the Cadia mine, and now they filter a lot of that underground crushed ore. So I think we're getting some improvements. It's a very awkward relationship. I find that we deal with politicians, published science, the media and the community as an amalgam, and sometimes they're almost like blades of a windmill that come rushing at you. The community is very concerned about this too. So I just heard the other day that one of the people on the Cadia Community Sustainability Network had their tests done of their tank and their gutters, and they're selling the house and moving because of that.
Wow. Wow. That just poses so many, really, so many issues for the community. Because in Narrabri, we have experienced abandonment as well due to pollution. And sometimes it's not just an aware family going, no, look, we can't stay living here. Sometimes it's it's the state government has what they call the VLAMP, the Voluntary Land Acquisition and Mitigation Policy. And what happens there is that if you live in a surrounding area and you can prove that you're being bombarded to a certain degree by dust or noise, that the mine then is forced to negotiate with you and buy your property. But guess what they do then? They then rent that property out to another. Often it's a worker, but in some cases, in the Narrabri area, Maules Creek Mine has been actively trying to attract families to come and live in the houses that the people actually left because they were paid out to leave because they were too polluted.
So this slide, I looked at of all the samples we collected at the bottom of the tank, we looked at what percentage of those samples fail the Australian Drinking Water Guidelines for health. So for lead, you can see that's well over 90%. But then there's the other group, arsenic, nickel, chromium and manganese. And then we compared that with Menduran. Lead is a problem everywhere. And I honestly think it's associated with roofing materials and paint materials. And Narrabri. And I suppose, like a lot of these things, we talk about pivoting with the project. I came to study particles. I saw one in the river the other day, which is kind of exciting. I studied metal pollution and PFAS pollution. The river has very serious issues there, but to be honest, how we manage private drinking water tanks in regional Australia, that's probably my biggest surprise out of this. I'm not that surprised with the regulation of the mines. That needs improvement, but we need to encourage and support testing and cleaning of domestic water tanks. And addressing that, I think 1 million people in Australia deserve more guidance with that.
The exposure.
Well, I can come to take a sample of a tap here, drink from the kitchen tap in capital cities. Melbourne water's probably the best in Australia, with great confidence. But when I go to a regional farm, I can't help it. I just look around a bit. Are there any branches overhanging that or a TV aerial, i.e. birds roosting on that? Because you're drinking generally unfiltered and untreated water.
Did you have a question?
Do you think the Australian drinking water standards need to be improved about this? Because my question is, I sit on an Australian Department of Health.
Hang on, I'll give you the microphone. It's a question about whether the Australian drinking water standards should be strengthened.
Yeah, and I sit on an Australian Department of Health committee on behalf of the public. They call it a consumer advisory group. And we just discussed the Australian drinking water standards at the last meeting, because they had the updated guidance on PFAS. So I guess my question is, do you think something needs to be improved in these guidelines? And is there research, and on behalf of the public, can I raise something?
I'd have to say my opinion is that the guidelines at the moment are totally fantastic for town water supplies, city water supplies, but why do they ignore 1 million people? And I'm not just talking about the guidelines, but also the governance, local government, state government, Commonwealth, all three levels. I don't think it is good enough that we had considerable concerns that this mine was impacting on these regional water tanks. Okay, thanks. Thank you. The community has spent something in the order of $200,000 on the testing to substantiate that. It did get action, but the Cadia community is quite a wealthy area. And then our control area, Menduran, they've got serious water issues. We're going to go back there and talk to them. And in fact, I'm going to have a meeting with the EPA. Their advice is always clean out your tank. But there's a huge policy gap here. And a lot of people in country towns like that don't have a lot of resources. What do we do about it? I don't have the answer.
But there are some gaps too, like aluminium, for example, is an example where, I mean, there are examples of different metals that are present generally in the environment, and there isn't an actual guideline. There's just a recommended, maximum, but they do not go as far as of saying a guideline. So, yeah, to that extent, I think they should be strengthened, but they haven't been updated for quite a while either, have they?
Bit by bit, they like PFAS was recently updated.
Does it make a difference between the material that the tank is made of?
Yes.
versus the plastic?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the tank material, definitely. Part of the data, particularly from Anna's work, for some reason, Narrabri area has lots of concrete tanks. Concrete leaches, believe it or not. Concrete is actually quite porous, but it leaches the other way. So they've got the highest mineral levels. So the pH rises. And if you change the pH, that's associated with the reactivity of the water as well. Tank material seems to be switching right across to plastic, just about everywhere. Still quite a lot of metal tanks, some fiberglass. Concrete definitely has an effect, and the metal tanks definitely do as well.
As a short-term solution, would the under-the-sink filtration systems make a difference to have healthier water for people?
Yep, that's a great question. If anyone travels much in regional Australia, particularly if you go to Western Australia, just about everyone's got filtration. Even in, Adelaide, Perth, a lot of people have it. But yes, so the next round of sampling, we're going to do more testing of bottom samples. We just did total metals. We're going to filter it just to identify, are the metals strongly bound to the particulate? Is it actually affecting the water as well? At the moment, it's basically a mixture of the two. And the majority of the tanks and people we visited don't filter. So yeah, that's a really good question, because that's action that people can take to, particularly when that sediment layer gets mixed up, assuming they don't clean it, that could help reduce the self-contamination.
I've got a bit of a comment and then a question. So I have two properties, one in the Blue Mountains in a PFAS hotspot. So we have a filter on our tap just now to stop us dying from PFAS. And then I'm also working in Cowra, which is in the Cadia mine area. So I'm right in the thick of that too. So personally, and I'm a chemist, so my background is a chemist. So I'm personally interested in all of this, but professionally, I work for Landcare. And as Landcare, we've had these discussions about how much do we get involved in this sort of conversation, because our role as Landcare is often inspiring people through hope, replanting, revegetation, you know, what can we do as opposed to what are we, you know, victims of? Do you have any thoughts about that, or is there anything you're doing maybe to help smaller land care groups by working with the bigger land care to sort of see what we can do? Because we can't get too political.
Can I just first ask?
Yes.
What part of the Blue Mountains do you live in?
Medlow Bath.
Wow.
Where the dam is shut
Okay,
because it was killing us.
So if people don't understand this, this is a water supply of Sydney that was discovered last year to have very high PFAS concentration. Yeah, I might talk to you afterwards. That's very interesting.